Season 2, Episode 7. My name's Andrew Jones, and with me, like usual, is...
Neil Greggor. It's lovely to be back and having a chat in the new year.
In the new year, exactly. It's now 2024, so Happy New Year, everybody. Hope you've had a good Christmas and a good New Year with your friends and family and enjoyed yourself, and now you're back listening to us. So it's all downhill from here, really, isn't it? Anyway, today we are joined by two guests. We are joined by Teresa Dent, who is Chief Executive of the GWCT, as well as a board member of EFG. So morning, Teresa.
Good morning, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, thank you very much. And also by Peter Shallcross, who is a farmer member of the EFG. So morning, Peter.
Morning.
And also Chairman of the Nadder Valley Cluster. Is that right? That's correct. Fantastic. So we'll discuss what all these acronyms mean in a minute for people. But we're here. What brought this podcast on is I'd never heard of EFG until I saw them sponsoring the Gillingham and Shaftesbury show, what would have been last year now. And so I looked them up, and they're the Environmental Farmers Group. And when I read their story, I thought, oh, that's interesting. So I made contact, met with Teresa at the show, and we discussed doing a podcast. So here we are. So welcome to you both. And I guess, like usual, Teresa, tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you get to where you are today?
Well, thank you for having me on the podcast. To get here, I did a degree in agriculture at Reading University. I'm a Wiltshire girl, so I was brought up near Tisbury, not far from here.
So local girl? Originally.
Local girl, yes. Yeah. Went to Salisbury Grammar School. Then I worked as a farming consultant for about 20 years with clients Wiltshire, Hampshire, Dorset and further north. And then in the beginning of 2002, I took on the job of Chief Executive of what was then the Game Conservancy Trust at Burgate Manor at Fordingbridge. And I expect many of the people listening will have heard of the Game Conservancy Trust. We changed our name in 2008 to the Game and Wildlife Conservation Trust because that better reflected the breadth of the work that the Trust does.
And that's the GWCT that we mentioned.
And that's the GWCT.
Yep.
So GWCT is a nature conservation charity like many others. So we want wonderful wildlife in the countryside and we want a thriving countryside. But perhaps where we differ is we're very research focused. So over half our staff are scientists who work in the field. Yep. The other thing we're focused on is we don't have nature reserves. We consider it our mission to help farmers and land managers like Peter make the land they look after a better place for nature.
So rather than a specific area that's set aside and just that little area, you want the whole encompassing farms
yes.
area to be more environmentally wildlife friendly.
Yes, that's what we see our role is to help people who look after their own land, as I say, to make it a better place for nature. And our research is mainly focused on how they achieve that often quite difficult balance between food production and wildlife and good environmental outcomes. So that's the point of our research.
So Peter, if we can bring you in now, what's your background? Where do you fit into this?
So I'm a farmer, farming at Tisbury.
Yep.
We've also got land we rent at Tefford, so it's all connected by the River Nadder.
Yep.
And I'm primarily a dairy farmer. We've always had dairy cows on the farm.
Yep.
And at the moment we've got 220 red and white Norwegian Red Cross cows.
Oh, you'll be happy then, Neil.
Yeah.
I think you've had something to do with it.
So you're here today more. So our Teresa more to talk about the overall aim, structure, goals of EFG. Peter, you're more to sort of, I guess, on the ground and how it affects you and because really the aim of this is obviously we'll talk about number of members, etc. But we want to be encouraging other people as part of this. If it benefits everybody, then why not? And hopefully, even if it's not here, because I looking at your website again yesterday, while your primary focus has been here in the southwest, I see you've now got what would you describe, a mirror group up north somewhere, is it?
Yes, we do.
That's got to be a good thing.
Yes, we've been really encouraged by how interested farmers have been in the Environmental Farmers Group. We set up the first one in the Hampshire Avon catchment, and we started having serious conversations about it in May 2021.
So what was it before? Because catchment areas have been around, but what's made it different that EFG have now come in from where it was before? What was the setup before? Who was running the catchments, or how were they being run?
It's been born out of the farmer cluster movement, really.
Right.
So Peter explained at the beginning that he is chairman of the Nadder Valley Farmer Cluster.
Yeah.
So farmer clusters were something that GWCT invented back in 2013, and we were prompted by a comment that Robert Shepherd made, who's now chairman of the Environmental Farmers Group, because we had set up a farmer-led nature improvement area for DEFRA with farmers on the Marlborough Downs,
Yep.
which was funded by a grant from DEFRA, and that was, I think it ran from between 2012 for about 2 years. And then the funding wasn't going to be renewed, and Rob Shepherd said, well, I don't want to do a nature improvement area because that's far too bureaucratic, but I would do something with my friends and neighbours for wildlife.
Yeah, come together and...
So I went back to him and said, well, were you serious about this? Would you do it? And he said, yeah. So he called together a meeting of his, literally, friends and neighbours.
Yeah.
We sat round his dining room table and started to talk about how, as a group of farmers, they could do more to improve wildlife on their farms. I had Pete Thompson with me, who was GWCT's quite well-known biodiversity advisor and very, very good. And he asked them one question, which was, what wildlife do you want to see on your farm? And it was very interesting what they came out with. They all came out with different things, the different farmers. And at one point, Rob Shepherd's son Digby came into the room because he was wondering what all the dads were doing in the dining room in the middle of the afternoon.
I'm in trouble.
and they explained to him, slightly nervously, that they were going to be starting up this conservation group. And he said, oh, can we do snakes? I love snakes. And Pete Thompson, of course we can do snakes. And I suspect that farm cluster has more amphibian and reptile traps on it than any other farm cluster in England because of the enthusiasm of a 13-year-old boy that first afternoon. So then we did a pilot, which was very kindly funded by DEFRA and Natural England. We had put together 6 farmer clusters. The pilot went really well, and then Natural England and DEFRA started funding what they called the Facilitation Fund in 2015, and that funded advisors to be the source of advice for groups of farmers who wanted to create better wildlife outcomes. And we still just ask the same question, what wildlife would you want on your farm?
Exactly, because wildlife doesn't just suddenly stop at your boundary. Well, I want snakes this side, for example, or whatever. It just doesn't happen. It needs to be a joined up effort from everybody to make sure it works for everybody, isn't it? Because as you say, just because you want snakes, well, you can't suddenly put a fence up and they're not passing my fence and that's it. They will wander wherever they happen to wander. So
by the time we got to 2021, there were 6 or 7 farmer clusters in the Avon catchment, including the Nadder Valley one.
Yep.
They were doing a really good job, some really good conservation successes.
How many farms are usually in each cluster?
It varies, so we've got 23 members.
Yep.
There's another local one, Wiley Valley group,
Yep.
and they're a different kind of group because they're mostly arable farmers.
So be mainly arable,
Yeah, so they're fewer members
There's
and much bigger.
bigger acreage they're talking
Yeah,
about. Yeah.
Exactly, but they have expanded their membership to smaller, so they're probably up to 23 as well.
Okay.
And we're looking to expand. Now we've got the admin better.
Yeah.
It's easier to have absorb more members.
Exactly. You've got to get the infrastructure in place to then make the next move forward, isn't it?
And with what we're planning in the future, it's imperative we join up the gaps because we're quite a spread out group. We're all the way from Dinton to Mere, in fact.
Okay.
We call we've got members on the Loddon as well.
Okay, it's quite a big area.
It is, yeah.
Really, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
Okay. So sorry, Teresa, going back to we took about the different clusters.
Yeah, so the whole of the Avon catchment had 6 or 7 really good clusters, and by 2021 we knew that the basic payment scheme was going to end. We knew it would halve by the end of 2024, finish by the end of 2027. We worked out that for the whole of the Avon catchment, that basic payment scheme is worth £37 million a year to the farming economy. So this was going to be a big financial shock to farmers, and I got very worried that they were doing really good conservation work, but would they be able to continue to if that income was lost? Because although most of them were in agri-environment schemes, actually a lot of them spent quite a lot of that basic payment scheme on their conservation.
Yes.
Particularly if they got enthusiastic.
Yeah.
And if you had a son who wanted lots of snakes and rabbits.
It sounds like you're not so keen on the snakes.
No. They're great.
I'm with you.
They're great. So I thought we needed to do something that would create a bigger structure. It was clear that government was going to change its support from the basic payment scheme to rewarding farmers for the delivery of environmental goods and services.
Yeah.
It also became clear that it was actually going to be quite difficult for farmers to access those rewards as individual farmers. And
I think we've all known for a long time that's the way it's been going, isn't it? It will be rewarded for environmental returns rather than purely agricultural returns.
But this is very new. That market has not existed before, and it was very unclear how farmers could benefit from it, and also how they could negotiate fair returns as individual farmers. So I talked to a group of farmers in the catchment, mainly the lead farmers in the farmer clusters, and said I thought there would be scope and advantage in setting up a bigger group that would bring all the farmer clusters in the catchment together. They could create a really strong environmental plan for the whole of the catchment, all the farmers working together.
Really joined up.
So that would be one side of the coin, if you like, really good environmental outcomes that could address the big challenges of loss of biodiversity, climate change. But on the other side of the coin, they would have a structure and a scale and level of cooperation that would allow them to secure fair rewards for the farmers for delivering those environmental outcomes. That was the principle of it.
Okay. And how have you found it? I guess, Peter, you've probably been one of those original people that were involved in the conversation, being the chairman of your cluster.
That's right, we were. We were all involved, and it was quite a special moment when this overarching group came together. It hadn't been tried before.
Yeah.
So sort of with Teresa's help, it was leading the way.
Because it started with the Hampshire Avon,
It did,
wasn't it?
yes.
But it's now progressed that it's got is it the Stour, and there's another one as well. I can't remember which the other one is.
It has progressed. It's really interesting. It's progressed from the interest of the farmers.
Right.
So farmers contacting each other or contacting Rob Shepherd and saying, I hear you're chair of this new group.
Right. So it's been word of mouth is what's
Entirely
what's
word of mouth.
Okay.
Between farmers, really. There's been very little publicity about it. A couple of articles in Farmers Weekly.
So I'd never heard of it
Yeah.
until I saw you sponsoring Gillingham and Shaftesbury. Yeah, EFG, who are they?
Yeah, but really through word of mouth between farmers. So the Hampshire Avon was the first one, expanded into the Test and Itchen, expanded into the Dorset Stour and the Piddle and Froome, the Poole Harbour rivers. They're just starting up now. The Isle of Wight is interested. We've got a group starting in North Lincolnshire, another group in Northamptonshire, and quite a few other places that are expressing interest.
So using your expertise to mirror what you've done to create a bigger overall arching group within their area.
Yes, they're all coming in, all of those ones are coming in within the EFG because it makes sense for them to take advantage of the Environmental Farmers Group setup.
Yeah.
I mean, it took us a year with this smaller group of farmers working with GWCT and our subsidiary Natural Capital Advisory to launch it.
Yeah.
And we had, I think it was a year of a weekly meeting for an hour every week to get it launched. There was a lot to do in it. Yeah, the farmers were unbelievably committed because none of them have been paid to do this. It's all completely voluntary, their time. And so it took a year of weekly meetings to get it launched. We launched it, I think it was the 3rd of May 2022. And since then, it's expanded in the way I've described. But it was a lot of work to set it up, to sort out the legals, decide the structure. We set it up as a farmers cooperative, so it's farmer-owned and farmer-led. If we do environmental trades, there's an equalisation formula, so every member of the cooperative benefits to a small extent from the trade, although the bulk of it goes to the farmer who's provided the land for the trade. So it's been very carefully thought through. So for other farmers coming in, it's easier for them to come in under that umbrella than set it up again.
And so you've got the admin,
so we
the
set
expertise,
up,
everything's in place now to roll forward. I guess the question's got to be the fact you've already had that success in 18 months. Did you expect that, or did you think, well, we'll set up the one in the the
Hampshire Avon, yes.
Hampshire Avon. Did you expect already to be doing the other ones that you were and create the interest you were, or you thought, well, we'll sit quietly for a couple of years, we'll let it work, and then we'll try and push?
No, I think it's fair to say we did not expect the level of interest that farmers have shown. No, that's come as a surprise. We thought probably we might go into neighbouring catchments because there was some of the original members of the Avon catchment one, they had land that spread into the Dorset Stour, and some early joiners were from the Test and Itchen, but we probably didn't expect to expand as much as we are now.
It's been a real positive success story by the sounds of it.
It's a very positive demonstration of how committed farmers are to delivering good environmental outcomes and how much they want to engage in this new opportunity around creating an environmental market for natural capital.
Yeah. So what would you be doing as a farmer that would be sort of adding to this? What is expected of you, or how does it work?
Various ways, some of which haven't come to fruition yet, so it's exciting.
Yeah.
The future is as exciting as the present for the EFG. It's the spreading of really good ideas. So for example, we've been trained, we've had, as a farmer cluster, we've been trained up to be better at doing different environmental, planting flower meadows or cleaning up the river. We all know, and particularly the soils. We concentrate a lot on the soils. And within the EFG umbrella, the most exciting thing we're doing, just getting off the ground, is sampling the water on each farm, or various strategic sampling points, all up and down the Nadder within our membership. And that's so we recognise that farmers are causing pollution, and we're not the only ones. So it needs everybody to take their part. But we can try to start to sort out our bit quietly using our own data.
So
That's the most exciting thing. Which is just starting.
Yeah.
So-
Fantastic.
So
Yeah.
what has changed practically for you, Peter, from when you were just the clusters to being part of the EFG? The fact that you've got the overall umbrella to provide the training that you've just mentioned, or have other things changed? How have you seen that change on farm?
So the environmental farmers groups set up contracts with interested parties, or in this case, in my case this year, it was Wiltshire Council
Yep.
to do a nutrient neutrality scheme.
Yep.
So basically, when a development takes place, it's got to be shown to be
Neutral, yes.
neutral in terms of phosphates, particularly.
There's been a case of that just recently, hasn't there? Was it Norfolk or something? Was it there's a housing development,
That's
wasn't
right.
there? And they paid the farmer, I don't know,
I was a pig farmer.
pig
wasn't it?
farmer, that's right, a lot of money basically not to farm, just so they can offset the nutrient
Phosphates.
for this new housing development.
That's
So
right.
similar sort of thing you're
So,
talking
so this is much more farmer practical, because I don't have to give up my farming in this case. So I do a sensible thing, which is putting a cover crop
Yep.
over the winter
Yep.
on a stubble.
Yep.
So in September, I got my neighbour to drill grass seed into a field that had previously been wheat.
Yep.
And otherwise it would be bare all over until the next crop in the spring.
Yep.
And particularly times like this where it's raining incessantly, the water runs off into the river.
Yeah.
Taking your topsoil with you, if nothing else.
As well, yeah, that's right.
Well, exactly. Nutrients, topsoil, it's all all going in the river, which is not where you want it to be. You want it staying where it is.
Yeah, so it enables new housing, because fortunately or unfortunately we need to carry on house building.
Of course we do.
And this is a way to continue it and do good at the same time.
I was going to say, and actually help in the big picture,
That's
which
right.
is absolutely important.
Yeah.
But it's been easier doing it through EFG than I'm sure it ever would have been to try and do it individually on your own.
100%. I wouldn't touch it otherwise.
Oh wow!
The contracts are set up through AFG,
Yep.
negotiated, the payments are negotiated.
Yep.
The final contract is with Wiltshire Council,
Mm-hmm.
but all of these trades I need help with.
Yes, whether legal or whatever it happens to be.
Yeah. And the next big one in the future is biodiversity net gain.
Yep.
So in the future, I think it's a year's time, new developments will have to prove that they're neutral in biodiversity plus 10%. So they've got to increase the biodiversity on any site that they're developing.
Okay.
And so they're going to look for places to put that extra biodiversity on.
Oh, so they're trading effectively with you to be providing that extra
Exactly.
biodiversity.
Yeah. So it's similar to the nutrient neutrality.
Yep.
Plus 10%.
Yep.
And so
I was going to say, if they're building houses, my immediate thought is we're going to lose biodiversity.
No,
What you're
that's
saying
right.
is that they may lose it on the immediate site, but then they are trading with
Setting
you
off, yeah.
to offset that by providing biodiversity on farm.
Yes, at plus 10%.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
right.
Yeah. Okay.
And so already the ecologist from EFG has come in and done a baseline survey of the farm.
Yep.
So this is the size of the hedges, the condition of the woodland, all the condition of all the grassland, be it flower-rich meadows or cattle grazing, the river, the riparian habitat.
Yeah.
Everything. So it took Amber a couple of days to do the whole farm, and that gives a baseline which you can get credits for by increasing that. So increasing the value of all these habitats.
And that's coming, because I know I went to a conference that had been last year now, in 2023, and they had one of the head milk buyers from one of the milk buyers, and he turned up and he said, someone said, right, if you've got one word to say to people moving forward, he said biodiversity. He said that will be the next big thing in your milk contracts, will be biodiversity.
Yeah. So
again, it's tying in with that, isn't it?
It is all tying in, and it makes perfect sense, because I'm a co-op member of Arla.
Yep.
And I don't know if you heard it from them, but that's exactly what.
No, this was someone else actually.
Okay.
I think I've heard it down the line with Isla.
Yeah, so there's a new sustainability incentive,
Yeah.
which is a whole raft of measures which actually fit onto our climate audit, or climate
Yes.
change audit.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we've got to
It's,
we've got to
it's
measure.
80 points at the moment, isn't it?
That's
on all
right.
the different
Yeah.
bits and pieces.
Yeah, so it's an incentive to become more carbon neutral, really,
Yeah.
Yes.
and more environmentally aware and do environmental good. And the whole basis of that is that the retailer, e.g. the consumer, will pay a premium for that. In the same way as the EFG, is the same way that EFG is working.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's I was in Denmark recently, and this one farmer, Forza, was a few young guys with us, and he was actually chatting very passionately about this, and buying a biodigested plant. A whole group of farmers had actually bought this, and that actually, and exactly what you guys are saying, it sort of like clears it in my mind how that you could actually do something like this. But a lot of them bought it, and this guy was actually saying that last year, 20% of his farm income was actually from that biodigester. When he told me that whole story, just that whole thing that sort of like fits in. But what you guys are saying, you have to have a group of people. Yeah, and like what you guys are doing, it's fantastic, because that's how things like this will come to be. And
I think that's the principal difference between the farmer clusters. Well, there are a number of principal differences. One is scale. The Environmental Farmers Group allows the farmers to put together conservation plans for a whole ecosystem, a whole catchment. Then they've got a vehicle, a legal mechanism to broker trades on behalf of the farmers.
That's one thing I found really interesting what you said. I hadn't realised that sort of trading was,
Yes.
when you initially started trading, the immediate thing people think about is carbon trading. Everyone keeps saying that's coming, but I hadn't realised that trading was happening on biodiversity and other bits and pieces, which is, from those that are farming, has got to be a good thing, because if it means it's another source of income, it potentially replaces that BPS and it allows you to do work that maybe you would have done anyway, but obviously giving you that financial benefit from it, then it's got to be a benefit to everybody. It's got to be a good thing.
I think farmers really need to be able to access these new sources of income, and in a way that gives them a fair return. So the EFG is looking at biodiversity net gain trades, phosphate neutrality trades, nitrate neutrality trades. Some other areas, flood mitigation will probably form part of it, and carbon as well.
Yep.
But soil carbon is quite a difficult area because these trades tend to be quite long-term commitments. And if farmers are aiming themselves to get to net carbon zero by 2040, which is one of the three main environmental objectives of the Environmental Farmers Group, then they need to be careful that they get their own carbon equation right before they sell carbon elsewhere. So it's quite
Absolutely.
complicated,
Yeah.
and having the opportunity to share that knowledge within a group. And the Environmental Farmers Group has called in a soil scientist expert to help with that. The farmers come to regular meetings, so they get briefings. But the trades are beginning to happen.
Yeah.
We've done one, EFG has done one phosphate neutrality trade. So that triggered the equalisation formula that I mentioned earlier. And we've got another that's close to completion, and overall, if you look at the pipeline of potential trades, phosphate, nitrate, biodiversity net gain, by the end of last year, it was at about 25 million. Not all of them will come off, because some are just a discussion at the moment, what we call a glimmer, but it is indicative of there's quite a lot of demand out there from developers, councils, water companies, etc. So the Environmental Farmers Group offers them a single point of contact to get the opportunity to trade with farmers at scale.
So I hadn't realised that was some of, well, that's why we're here, some of what EFG is doing and what it's about. Obviously I've read the website, but it doesn't give you the detail. Obviously that's why we're here and what we're discussing. But what I was going to ask. Yeah, like you're saying, phosphates and that are all coming into it. Because I know myself, I would have been a year ago now, was involved on a pilot scheme looking at phosphate levels on farm in terms of dietary what those cows were being fed. So looking at taking together all their diet, what their phosphate levels were, what they were, where potentially they were compared to recommendations, and potentially what we could do on farm if they needed to be reduced. So all of these things are coming. I mean, I looked at it as a, for me, be ahead of the game a little bit, because while that was a pilot scheme, these things are coming that we will have to, on farm, look at our phosphate levels in our diet. It's not just going to be looking at your energy levels or your crude protein levels or whatever it happens to be. It's going to be also looking at your phosphate levels, your nitrate levels, your all of these environmental pressures, I don't know if that's the right word, all these environmental requirements will come into whenever, for me, what I do, formulate a ration, they are going to come into it. That we are going to have effectively more boxes to tick to make sure that the phosphate levels are correct, the nitrate levels are correct, or whatever it's going to be.
But, with my milk buyer is here already. All of the things you just said, and actually they make perfect sense because they're all efficiency savings.
Yes.
There's no point feeding too much protein and it going out the back of the can.
No.
I mean, that's what we've sort of said, isn't it? We've ended up doing more sort of sustainability, podcasts that had a sustainability angle that we weren't necessarily realising until we did them. But then we went, actually, 90% of the time, all you've got to do is swap out sustainability for efficiency. Most of it is simply being more efficient. And being better at what we're doing.
So almost everything of that is, it's funny how it all sort of goes in a complete circle. And even when we were looking at that nitrogen cracker and what a huge impact that would make on your bottom line, never mind anything else, but what you're doing for the environment is just as important, and that you sort of, they all seem to be feeding into each other.
Can I ask what a nitrogen cracker is?
Well, a nitrogen cracker takes the
Listen
nitrogen.
to the podcast, Peter.
It takes the nitrogen out of the manure, and then basically it's actually a clear liquid that you can actually look through. So it's like a glass of water.
It takes your slurry. There's a number of different schemes out there, but we talked to Joz about their one. So it takes a slurry, it separates it into a liquid and the solid. It takes the liquid phase and then puts it through a process using some acids and I can't remember, was it some electricity, I think, something like that. And you end up basically with a sprayable liquid fertiliser. And I mean, I know on the farm we went in the morning to talk to them before we did the podcast, didn't it? I mean, they brought their agronomist along as well, and the agronomist was like, "Well, if this all adds up," he said, I could cut my fertilizer. I could cut the fertilizer purchases on this farm in half. Now, the downside was they went away and did the figures, and it wasn't
quite
financially sustainable here because there isn't the money behind it, because one of these units was big enough to do about 350 cows housed all year round, and it was going to cost about 300 grand I think overall to get it set up. It's basically
all euros.
They're built into effectively a shipping container that then put on farm and away you go. But they've run them in Holland now for a number of years, and or 2-3 years it would have been, and like one guy reckoned he was going to pay it off within 5 years, but he was then paying, was it something like 30,000 euros a year
Huge problems over in Holland
to export all of their manure because of the phosphates and that. And he was saying, well, because I don't have that, because this is making it more usable, blah, blah, it was paying for itself, but that wasn't here yet. But I know there's at least 3 systems like this available now. And I think we said at the time, I think it's going to be a case of, it will come, like all of these things, technology gets cheaper, it gets more accessible. In 10 years' time, I think it won't be a case of why are you doing it, it'll be a case of why aren't you doing it.
Again, one of the other incentive points is fertiliser use.
Yeah,
and,
exactly.
And it's all
Yes.
trying to
Yeah.
incentivise us to use less artificial fertiliser.
That's right, and
Exactly.
what it actually does is it dries it out, and you can use it for eco bedding. Not
Oh,
as much
yeah.
in the UK, because I don't think we're allowed to as much as some of the other countries, and that's not always a great idea. So that doesn't always work. But as a result, it's dry, so it doesn't smell. So transportation to your lands is less.
Mhm.
So the whole point, it just comes over.
And you're only taking dry matter, you're
Yeah.
not taking the liquid fraction, so therefore you're saving cost on that side of things. So yeah, there's all sorts of interesting things coming, and like you say with the Arla, I mean, I know I've got a client who said to me, I need to push my heifers a bit more because of Arla, because he still was calving them at 3-year-old, and he's like, well, I've got to go quick because that's obviously what's costing him in terms of carbon footprint. And so all of these things are making it more efficient. I mean, we did the one on milk powders with Laura, didn't we, the podcast, and that really, it comes down to, if you can do a better job of having to rear less calves because they're lasting longer and all of these things, look at they're calving sooner at two rather than say 2.5 or whatever it is, they're all just efficiencies that are just reducing carbon footprints.
But I think the Environmental Farmer Group will give more opportunity for that sort of thing,
Yeah,
because
exactly.
by being a big group,
Yes.
it's legally constituted, it can apply for grants
Exactly.
and support, and farmers, you can create opportunities for farmers to share that sort of capital investment, particularly if it's portable. So I would hope, as we're looking to generate this whole catchment conservation plan, and there are 3 things that the farmers want to be in that really strongly. One is cleaner water, the other is reversal of biodiversity loss and species recovery, and the third is net carbon zero farming.
Yeah.
So all of these things can contribute to that, and as a big group, they could apply for an innovation grant to secure a piece of equipment like that, and start seeing if they can move it around lots of individual farms
That's
and
right, like the Danish did.
spread the cost.
Yeah, because the Danish farmer, he said there was a group of them, and that it just made so much sense to me. Because again, I mean, the more people, the bigger the voice. So you're just so much more powerful.
And it ticks multiple boxes. It ticks cleaner water, it ticks improved biodiversity, it ticks net carbon zero. So,
That's right.
there's win-wins to
Yeah,
this.
exactly, and just what we need actually. We've got to go in that direction. Like you said, it's no use sort of like sticking our heads in the sand and pretending things aren't wrong or go wrong, or we have to find solutions.
And we farmers are busy doing multiple things,
Exactly.
and we haven't got time to sort all this out. So
No.
if there's somebody helping us, doing it with us,
I know.
Very
it
good
makes
point.
things happen.
Yeah.
I mean, I've got to admit, when I saw it, it was like, why has no one thought of this before? It's always the way, though, isn't it? When someone's done, when it's really simple and really obvious, you think, why has nobody thought of this before? And
How do we let this one slip?
You know what I mean? And it just you say, it just seems such an easy concept that. Why didn't we think of this? Why did somebody not think of this before in terms of bringing people together? Or, as you say, the whole catchment area. It just makes so much sense for everybody to be on the same page, trying to achieve the same thing. Not cluster here, cluster here, cluster there. Right, we've got everybody together, so we've got the whole of the Stour, or the whole of the Avon, or the whole of the Froome, trying to work together to achieve the goals.
And I think that the fact that it's bottom up and farmer led is very important. I mean,
It makes a big difference, doesn't it?
I've been Chief Executive of GWCT for quite a long time, 20 years, and I've spent a lot of time in meetings in London with really great charities and very well-intentioned people, but quite often there's only one farmer in the room.
Yeah.
And when I go home, I think, who is in that room today, despite all these wonderful intentions, is going to go and lay a hedge or plant a wildflower margin? Because I'm not doing that, and they aren't either. But the people who do that are people like Peter, and they're the ones who get the work done on the ground. And I think government is realising that if it's going to achieve the environmental targets it set itself, which it published at the beginning of last year, that it is going to need to work much better with farmers and land managers, because they look after 72% of the land in England, whereas the RSPB recently published a figure that said 8% is managed for nature. So however wonderful those nature reserves might be, they can't deliver a reversal of biodiversity loss. And we have to look to wonderful farmers like Peter and his cluster members and all the people who've joined EFG to deliver that sort of biodiversity reversal.
Wow.
But like you say, it's got to involve the farmers, and you say it's good that's coming out, because it's just made me think of an example completely sort of slightly off, but I remember my father putting in the dirty water lagoons in the, what would that be, early mid-90s, and the local parish council insisted that you put a yew hedge in. And you can probably guess he gave them short thrift, telling them that he was not putting a yew hedge round his dirty water scheme. He was happy to put a hedge in. Well, not so he was happy, but he did put a hedge in. but he was not putting a yew hedge in. And of course, nobody... I'm guessing there weren't farmers on the parish council. They didn't understand why you didn't put a yew hedge where cattle were involved. But
Maybe
you
not.
need, like you're saying, there's plenty of probably good intentioned people, but you need the practical to. One of my favourite sayings is theory and practice. There's no point saying, well, in theory it will do this, if on practice, Peter or whoever it's going to be isn't going to do it, because it just doesn't work. It's got to work for the farm, it's got to work for the farmers, it's got to work for the area, whatever it's got to be. It's got to be practical to make it work, or it won't work. If it's too hard, people just go, oh, well, forget it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So where do you see then going forward for EFG? Obviously it's expanded greatly already. I mean, do you have plans to take over the country and run all of them?
That's up to the farmers. Because this is farmer owned and farmer led, and I just can't stress that enough. In terms of where it's going next, then we want to develop the conservation plans for each of the catchments, and that's a very exciting thing to do. Nobody has yet written a conservation plan for a whole catchment, so we'll be working with the farmers to think how we create habitat, connectivity, and it's moving the thinking from over the hedge of that farm boundary to the next farm, and then over the farmer cluster boundary to the next farmer cluster, and how you join this all up. So how you create things maybe like bat corridors or farmland bird corridors, pollinator corridors, looking at how much habitat you've got on areas of land and whether that's enough, what quality it is, thinking about how you improve water quality with riparian strips, and the sort of work that Peter and his farmers are doing, looking at how you prevent soil runoff getting into the river to create sedimentation. So there's a huge amount to do in that conservation plan, which personally I find very exciting. And the aim is to create an investable landscape. So this is going to be something that farmers are delivering across a big area at a time when all of the corporates want to be able to demonstrate that they too are contributing to mitigating the biodiversity and climate change crisis. And hopefully by creating these landscapes where we know there's going to be opportunity to deliver good conservation and wildlife outcomes, there will be opportunities for them to invest in creating that. And the plan will show how we think that those improvements can be tracked over time, because this is long term. We're not going to do this in a few years. You need at least a 10-year plan or a 20-year plan, and we will need investment to allow the farmers to achieve that.
As I say, and I see, it just made me think, there was a Radio 4, was it Farming Today, a couple of weeks ago from a farm not a million miles away from here. They're using AI and all sorts now to detect wildlife on farm, aren't they? Was it?
Yeah.
It measures the wing beats, I think. Was it to determine what the insects population was and to count the insect? No. So really interesting where some of this is going, and I guess where technology is going that you never would have even contemplated as being part of it.
I think
forward.
There's fantastic opportunities for farmers to monitor their biodiversity improvement with that sort of technology, And if we had all the farmers in EFG doing similar types of monitoring with maybe acoustic monitors or phone apps like EpiCollect, then you could actually gather a lot of very good data, stand it up as proper science, and show everybody what the farmers are delivering.
Yeah.
And that's very, very powerful, because farmers have not really had the opportunity to demonstrate what they can deliver. But we know they can achieve fantastic things. The Lower Avon farmer cluster, they've doubled the number of lapwing down on their farms at the bottom of the Avon and improved the breeding success, so the population is now stable. That's a fantastic achievement.
In what sort of time period?
They did that over 5 or 6 years.
Not really
And
a
to be
great
honest,
deal of time.
There isn't a nature reserve that's managed to do that. The farmers have managed to do it. And they should be very proud.
Yeah, everywhere else the lapwing numbers are dropping.
Yeah.
They're becoming extinct over large areas.
But they've done it.
Got an increase in the
Well,
range.
hats off to them, definitely.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you mentioned some cover crops earlier, Peter. What other practical things have you been doing on farm to make this happen?
I don't know if I should. One of my pet things is elm trees. And,
Right.
Yes.
and the cluster groups and the EFG,
Yeah.
just the farmer engagement is a really, really good way of spreading a good idea.
Yeah.
So I got interested in Dutch elm disease resistant elm trees
Trees, yeah.
a few years ago, and it's a really good way of using contacts to help spread them back into the landscape.
Resistant Dutch elm trees?
Yeah, there are.
There are. I didn't know. It'd be nice to see some elms back in hedgerows and woodlands out there.
Yeah, because there's so many pressures for our existing trees that to bring back one that was one of our big 3 trees in the past will really help.
Because
it out.
I mean, I'll be honest with you, all I really remember of elm trees is seeing lots of dead ones felled that were left out in the front, cut out the hedges because they had Dutch elm disease. They were left literally until it was time for, we need another bit of firewood, and
So
off we go.
I think we're of similar ages, but probably you can remember them in their prime, maybe.
Yeah. I was in South Africa. So I can't know.
But then you say
we did have it. We did actually have it.
You say that as an example. You say that as an example, though. I mean, I farmed in Victoria for 4 years, and when I first moved just outside the township where we were in Camperdown, through the middle of Camperdown, this double row of trees. I'm like, what the hell are these trees? They're obviously more a European type tree than a native Australian tree.
Yeah.
What is it? What is it? I don't recognise it at all. And then I found the sign. They were elm trees.
We did have them in South Africa.
They'd never had Dutch elm disease in Australia. They managed to keep it out. So through the middle of Camperdown was this huge avenue, double row of elm trees, and it was just beautiful to see, because my memory of elm trees is felled trees just left in the field until it was time to we need that for firewood, so some of them might be there for 5-10 years just because so many were chopped down because of the disease at the time.
Well, there is actually a Camperdown elm, which is a weeping elm, and it's fantastic. It's a beautiful umbrella shaped tree. We can't grow it here anymore because it got no resistance, so they're all gone. I went to Holland last week, and there's quite a few there still because they're controlling their Dutch elm disease.
Okay.
So I've seen the Camperdown elm there.
Right. So they managed to breed resistant ones then as well, I suppose. And
that's why I was there actually
to
see what they've been doing.
So you've been planting elms on farm?
Yes, I've got probably 100. I planted them in rows of different varieties. Yeah. So I can see
what one works.
And in Holland, I visited the original resistant tree trial.
Right.
From the 1970s.
Right.
And they're huge, brilliant looking, fantastic looking trees.
Because they're usually okay as youngsters, isn't it? So once they get to a certain height, is it? That's when the Dutch elm disease kicks in.
Yeah, the beetle which carries the fungus flies at a minimum of 4 metres. So it bumps into them when they get over a certain height.
Is that what it is? Right.
That's incredible.
Yeah. But we have got some non-resistant elms in the countryside. There's one at East Hatch. There's one at Warder.
Yeah.
They're spread around and they have survived. So there are some big trees around still.
There are some around. But they say it's not the usual thing you expect. No. You don't see many elms, do you? Because say we're obviously at that age that in the
Nearly all
70s
gone.
that was it. They had to be chopped down because there was no choice.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, I see elms being a big feature of the conservation plan for the Avon catchment, because I think it's wonderful that a farmer is importing disease-resistant elms, and I haven't met a farmer yet who doesn't want one of them on his farm.
Oh, sure.
So I think the problem is more supply than
It is.
anything
And
else.
the challenge is to get British trees.
Yeah.
And there is a British test, completely tested to be resistant. There is a British tree, so we're just trying to get somebody to propagate it, because there's not very much propagating capacity in this country anymore. So
But yeah,
that's what we need to do.
things like that would be lovely to see again. I mean, okay, it's been, I guess, nearly 50 years since Dutch elm disease, but yeah, just exactly. That's a lovely story. That if 50 years later we can bring the elm tree back in, then hey, happy days.
Yeah, and we just need to, I suppose, for want of a better word, breed them. And then
We need to breed them, yeah. Get enough of them to spread them around.
that's right. Well, I was just thinking to myself, being in genetics, can't we DNA test them?
Well, saying that, there's other tree diseases coming along now. You've got, is it the horse chestnut canker, is it? And then you've got the ash
Dieback.
dieback.
Yeah.
And I know myself, is it the road between here and Warminster? They obviously cut back, looks like a hell of a lot of an ash, young ash trees, I'm guessing because the ash dieback. Is, I guess, EFG in a position to maybe help do some of what we've just been talking about in terms of maybe looking at finding the resistant trees or the things like that, or is that maybe out of your remit a little bit? Because we all like seeing good trees out there, whether it's...
Well, we need them.
Yeah, exactly.
I think probably doing the research to find the resistant trees is out of our remit. That would more be Natural England or the Forestry Commission. But certainly providing the opportunity for farmers to access supplies of disease-resistant trees and get them planted around the catchment in a fairly coherent and balanced way would be something the conservation plan could look at. Yes.
And certainly push the research, if not do it yourselves. But
Yes.
it's always that voice that we say that
Yes,
we need.
if I can say that I've got 50 farmers who would like to plant elm trees that are disease resistant or 120, then that's great.
And then the impact it will have on our environment if they did that.
Yes.
Is phenomenal. And of course you want the right trees, because obviously I grew up in South Africa, and we had one of our biggest problems was actually bringing in trees for very, very good reasons, like Port Jackson to stabilise sand dunes and movement of sand dunes. They just took over, and they made a complete mess. Because I've actually explained in another podcast we spoke about, we natural fire going through for fynbos, which we call, is actually very good because it gets the seeds to pop and propagate. But now the problem is these Port Jacksons would come up, so the fire would run through, and the heat from these Port Jacksons burning was too high, and would actually destroy those seeds. So it worked exactly the opposite. So we actually made a complete mess, and of course by the time we woke up to the mess, getting rid of them was impossible. And
well, I think there's the cane toad in Australia, as you say, the whole fire management thing. There's a whole argument there that you need to remove the the firewood effectively, because it makes the fires so much worse, and that's what people have done for thousands of years. But all of a sudden, people said, no, you've got to leave it. So
and if it's the wrong trees,
it burns more ferociously.
Our trees
In the right
our
place.
country.
Exactly. So some really interesting. So I guess if people want to join EFG or know more about EFG, where's the best place to start? The website or?
Yeah, the website. So type in Environmental Farmers Group in the search engine. You'll get onto the EFG website. Then you can register your interest. There's an expression of interest section in the website, and then the team will get back to you and offer the opportunity to join.
Is there a minimum requirement or anything? I mean, if you're a smallholder, have you got to be above 50 acres, or could someone that's a smallholder be involved if there's potentially something that they can be? Because it's still another member, another voice. It all adds part of it. Or are there any requirements?
Well, at the moment, you have to be in control of your land for a period of time. I think we say 25 years, so that because to do a trade you might have to commit the land for quite a long period of time.
Yeah.
It is open to every farmer, but I think we've put a bottom threshold of 50 acres.
Yeah.
And it's open to tenants.
Right.
But if you wanted to join as a tenant, you would want to get the permission of your landlord, because if you do trades, that would have to have the landlord's permission. But quite a lot of the big estates are very keen for their tenants to join.
Yeah.
I bet. Yeah.
I mean, tenancy is a hot potato, isn't it? Because probably the estate owners may want a piece of that trade.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
we've both heard of that happening a lot. So, for tenants, it's very complicated at the moment.
And tenancies aren't like they used to be. You can't have the multi-generational tenancies like you used to, and that from what you're trying to do would probably actually be an advantage, but obviously that isn't the way it is now. So as you say, it's the balance of requirements, the landlord, the tenant, and everything else. But ultimately, you're doing this to the benefit of everyone, really, aren't you? Let's be honest.
Yeah, everything and everyone.
Excellent. So I think as we head to a close on this one, I guess, Teresa, any last words of wisdom or advice to anybody?
Well, it's been really nice to have an opportunity to talk to you about the Environmental Farmers Group, and I would just urge any farmer who's interested in learning more about it to go onto the website, express interest, and we'll get back to them, maybe invite them to one of the farmers' meetings.
Excellent. Yeah, good.
Peter?
I think what we haven't said is how rich this area is. Within the Avon catchment, we've got some fantastic habitats. We just talk about and hear about nature depletion. We're one of the most nature depleted countries in the world, but locally we're extremely lucky. I could go on for hours about the wildlife, the habitats within the area which the EFG is operating in. We're really, we've got to build on what we've got already.
Exactly. Take that base and keep moving further forward.
Yeah.
Any thoughts, Neil?
Well, very positive. I love this. It's great. It's been very interesting, and I've enjoyed it thoroughly. And I hope we see you guys around as well. So,
thank you for inviting us.
It's been great.
No, it has. It's been really good, and like I opened this saying, I knew nothing about you till beginning with Shaftesbury. Looked you up, and thank you for I guess filling in some of the pieces, or hopefully giving people that's listening to this aware of what you're doing. And maybe you're not within the current catchment area that EFG works, but be in contact, because this could work else. I see it worked elsewhere, or maybe it might inspire people overseas as well, because we do get plenty of overseas listeners on this as well, because it is to the benefit. And again, as you say, it's farmer led, a farmer cooperative coming together adds more voice and adds more clout, so to say, political clout, maybe, for want of a better word, to speak to people. Or as you saying, Peter, it allows you to have those conversations with Wiltshire Council or whoever it is that you just wouldn't have even entered into before, because you've got that knowledge and that support and that backup behind it to make it happen, and that's all positives. Thank you both very much for your time today. It's been absolutely fantastic. So really, on that note, I'd like to say thank you to you both. It's a goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.
Bye from me.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much, and goodbye from me.
And now for the really boring bit, I'm afraid, the legal disclaimer. The information provided during this podcast has been prepared for general information purposes only and does not constitute advice. The information must not be relied upon for any purpose, and no representation or warranty is given to its accuracy, completeness or otherwise.
Any reference to other organisations, businesses or products during the podcast are not endorsements or recommendations of ChewintheCud Limited. The views of Andrew Jones are personal and may not be the views of ChewintheCud Limited, and the views of Neil Greggor are personal and may not be the views of Viking Genetics and any affiliated companies. For more information on the podcast, articles and details of services offered by ChewintheCud Limited, visit www.chewinthecud.com. Thank you and goodbye.